Welcome to Essential EGL+Batch. This video series is based upon EGL Development Tools version 0.8. This is lesson 23. In the first part of this lesson, we'll talk about SQL. We switch to the database development perspective, and for our database connections, which we set up in lesson 22, we're going to sign in to EGL program. Now that we've assigned an EGL program, we're going to go back to the EGL perspective and we're going to create a new folder. So we right click on the EGL program project, select new and folder, and the name of the folder is going to be SQL. Then we'll click the finish button. That'll create a folder called SQL. Next, we right click on the SQL folder and we create a new file. And the name of the file is going to be script23.sql. That'll be the SQL for this lesson. Now, this video series is not based upon SQL. So we're going to really skip a lot of the stuff dealing with SQL. We'll just paste in some SQL that we're going to use. But for the SQL file, we're going to select, for the name, we're going to select EGL program. We highlight a little bit of SQL to create a table, and we execute that text. So now we have a table called Table 1. To show that we have a table called Table 1 and to show what it's going to look like, we execute the select statement. And in the Result tab, we have fields F1 and F2. Now, F1 and F2 are going to be integers for this lesson. Now, let's move on to EGL. We want to create a new package, as usual, called lab.lesson23. And inside of lab.lesson23, we'll want to create a new source file. So we right-click on the package, select New and Source File, and the name of the source file is going to be called Drop and Create Lib. We click Finish. Now, drop and create lib is going to have enough code in here to drop a table called Table 1, and then we'll work on create a table called Table 1. So we create a variable called ds, which the type is going to be SQL data source ? And we're going to set that equal to connectionLib.getConnection from lesson 22. Now, I do organize imports, and it brings in connection lib from lesson 22. But it does not automatically bring in SQL data source, so I have to type this manually. It's EGLX.persistence.sql.sql data source. Now, here's the new stuff for this lesson. We want to execute some SQL code. So it's going to be execute with, and then it's going to be a # SQL, open curly braces, and then the keyword from, and the variable ds. And we put our SQL in the middle of that curly braces. So it's execute with # SQL, and then from ds. And there's no space between the L in SQL and the curly brace. So let's bring up that script again. We open to script 23, and then we're just going to take the drop table statement. So we'll right-click on that and select copy. And then we go to our drop and create lib, and right there between the curly brace, we're going to paste in that drop table statement. And we'll fix it up a little bit. There's one important thing, though, to keep in mind, that an execute statement in EGL cannot execute multiple SQL statements. So there is no delimiter. The semicolon needs to come out. Okay, we can save that. And as usual, we need a program to go along with this. So let's create the program now. And we'll create a new source file. And the name of the program is going to be called Lesson 23. We'll paste in the contents of the program. which has the usual decoration, and it's going to call in its main function drop and create lib.demo, and we'll save that. Let's take it for a test drive. We'll we'll right-click somewhere in the editor and select Run as EGL Java Main Application. Let's bring up the console and see what happened. We have a runtime exception. And notice it's in the drop and create table function, and it says that there's no table to drop. So what we actually want to happen here is we don't really want to know in our drop and create lib that the table doesn't exist. So if the table doesn't exist, EGL is going to throw an exception. And by using a try on exception block, and we're going to ignore that exception. Just like that, we're going to ignore the exception. So let's take it for another test drive and see what happens. Bring up the console, and what should happen, yes, it didn't throw the exception back to the program. The exception has been handled in the drop table 1 function. It's been ignored. Now let's go on to create the create table 1 function. Now create table 1 is supposed to create a table called table 1. And we're going to use the same construct here of ds, an SQL data source question mark, equals connection lib dot get connection. And we don't actually want to use a try. If it doesn't create a table, we want an exception to be thrown and our program to finish. So it's the same thing, execute with #SQL from ds. Let's go to the script23 file and get the create statement. We'll copy that into the clipboard and again paste that inside the curly braces of our execute statement. And once again, we'll pretty it up a little bit. And it's really important that when we're copying from an SQL script that we take out the semicolon. So I'll demonstrate that with right click and cut to emphasize that you need to get rid of the semicolon. Otherwise the EGL will fail. Okay, so we're going to try to drop a table and then we're going to create a table. So let's run this. We'll bring up the console and see what we have. It ran to completion. That didn't take much, but let's see if our table really exists. We'll run the select query from the script23 SQL script, and we'll bring up our SQL results, and in the result tab, there's our table without any data in it. So that was successful. In part 3, let's talk about an error message that will come up if you close the IDE and return to run the program. So we'll bring up the program. We do like we usually do, run as EGL Java Main Application. And let's look at the console. It gives us an error. We need to be able to recognize this particular error when we're doing EGL development. Its null password is not supported. Where does that come from? Well, actually it comes from the fact that in our IDE we have not yet connected to the database. So let me put in my password. See, with the password not being there, it ends up being a null password. That's what the message means. We'll go back and run exactly the same program. So the EGL part of it hasn't changed, and now it runs to completion. This has been another lesson in Essential EGL Batch. Thanks for watching.